Episode 10 of the P S Gilmore story. Hello, and welcome back again to the story of P S Gilmore's role in the Civil War. When I was researching particularly this part of the story many years ago, I was shocked because of what I'm about to unveil. Why, you say? Well, I never had heard it before, and indeed I had adopted the approach at this stage that in the absence of any reasonable, verifiable research, I would approach the P.S. Gilmore story skeptically, expecting the worst, I suppose. I also wouldn't give any credence to hearsay or rumour in its retelling. After all, we all expect our heroes to be the best, the greatest, and thus sometimes we are greatly disappointed. And again, may I remind you that when I started this project, there wasn't any archive about Gilmore. There were just 2 books written about his life. The first one was P S Gilmore's America's First Superstar by Rusty Hammer, and the second one was Irish Orpheus by Marwood Darlington. Each book was actually invaluable as an introduction to the general story, but had offered very little detail in Gilmore's war experience, for example, presumably because of the lack of detail available for both researchers and authors at that time. However, later I located another wonderful reference book for anyone researching the history and heritage of the Irish in America, entitled Making the Irish American, published in 2006 by NYU and Glucksman Ireland House. Within its 733 fantastic pages, there wasn't even a mention of either Patrick S. Gilmore, P. S. Gilmore, Gilmore's band, or indeed any bands really under Gilmore's baton. It was almost like he didn't exist. Of course, in Ireland, there was little other than passing information or knowledge of Gilmore, primarily, I suppose, from the plaque in Ballygar. Even in all the Irish universities, no idea of the man or his legacy. But I remember so well standing looking at that plaque back in 2008 or 9 and asking P. S. Gilmore some questions in my own mind. Like, what did you think of Black America? Or of what was the slave issue like? Or did you have any slaves? And I thought back at that time, it's going to be really hard to get any idea of his thoughts from nearly 150 years ago. And then I found that letter by accident that I read in part to you 2 episodes ago, which Gilmore wrote back to the people in Boston. Don't forget, by the way, to click like and subscribe down below. I'm also working on a P. S. Gilmore favorites video list, which are all related to his story. I'll be back with that later, and it'll help you with the story as well. That letter that Gilmore wrote from the Roanoke Island years before, he included a line in it in regards his health, where he wrote, "I can eat as much hominy for supper as any other nigger on this land." Initially, I was shocked, as we're not used to that word here in Ireland. But then I noticed he had underlined the words, "any other nigger," in that letter, emphasizing that he was the same as, no better than, but the equal to the slave. And if this created a bias to me, I would, from now on, definitely tread very carefully and indeed check under every stone and see what story would crawl from beneath its care. And so back to Newburn. We know that Gilmore was indeed in discussions with authorities as early as March 1862 about the mustering of the bands. Gilmore objected strenuously to the disbanding of the bands almost 6 months before the mustering out occurred. Gilmore was indeed back and forth between the South and Boston over the next few months. He wrote and he spoke about this development, but he knew that the Union needed to save money. By August, the Special Order 78 was agreed by the Cabinet, and Gilmore's band was indeed mustered out in October 1862. On one of these visits to Boston, a discussion must have taken place with Governor John Andrews of Massachusetts, and the latter asked Gilmore, according to Gilmore's own writings, to reorganize the bands. Of course, we also know that there was nothing wrong with the bands in Massachusetts. But, for instance, on November the 1st, 1862, the Barnstable Patriot newspaper reported on a patriotic public meeting taking place in Hyannis, where speakers told of their experiences of the war. The delegation was accompanied by Gilmore's band, which of course guaranteed a large attendance. At some stage, the early development of the black regiments began in Camp Meigs, just outside Boston. Camp Meigs contributed more than any other camp in the state. 26 batteries and regiments were trained there, 25,733 men in total. It was actually here that Gilmore's 24th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment and the complete Burnside expedition had originated, and here that the new Black Regiment of the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment would train and prepare. And it would be P S Gilmore who would train the black bands for each of the black regiments that would play in the war. Precisely when training started for these black bands is very unclear, as details have disappeared. But there is little doubt that the request to reorganize the bands were issued by Governor Andrews to Gilmore shortly after he was mustered out of active service in August of 1862. It's also highly likely that Gilmore began immediately, or at least a few months before the Emancipation Act was announced. And I repeat this. A few months before the Emancipation Act was announced. Why? Because of the extent of training required to be done in those few months. They had to learn the basic drills, the military etiquette, signals, and their drills, and more drills, marching and fighting drills. They were part of every soldier's daily routine, both black and white. After each alternate drill, they would switch to the next formation. Plus, they had to learn the most important skill, the loading, discharge, and reloading of all firearms. And when all of that was done, then they had to learn their music and cram more basic notation and technique into each week than even Gilmore had ever done in the years of practice, performance, and revision. But however it was done can only be conjecture at this distance in time, but the dates don't lie. August 1862, Special Order 78, mustering out of the bands, including Gilmore's band. August, Governor Andrews asks P S Gilmore to look at the reorganization of the bands in Massachusetts. August to December, training commences with black musicians under P S Gilmore's tutelage. January the 1st, Emancipation Proclamation of President Abraham Lincoln. January the 23rd, 1863. Governor Andrews was ordered by Secretary of State Edwin Stanton to organize the recruitment of volunteers to be enlisted for 3 years and may include persons of African descent organized into a special corps. February the 21st, 1863, Lieutenant Hallowell was ordered to Camp Meigs, Reidsville, and took possession of 27 buildings for the future regiment. March the 10th, 1863, a meeting was held at Chickering Hall through Colonel Shaw and Lieutenant Colonel Hallowell to purchase instruments and to instruct and equip a band. A few weeks later, a concert was given by Gilmore's band in Chickering Hall in Boston, attended by numerous influential people from the state, and a fund was collected amounting to $500 as a fund for musical instruments for a new band for a new experimental regiment. May the 28th at 6:30 a.m., the 54th Massachusetts Regiment march out of Camp Meigs, Reidsville, Massachusetts. Later that day, preceded by Gilmore's band, they marched through the Boston streets to the State House to accept the colors from Governor Andrews. I quote from The Brave Black Regiment by Louis Emilio. All through the route, the sidewalks, windows, and balconies were thronged with spectators, and the appearance of the regiment caused repeated cheers and waving of flags. The name of the steamer that brought them south was coincidentally called the de Malay. One man who waited till the steamer was long gone was the father of one of those brave men that had been enrolled, Emancipator Frederick Douglass. It's noted in that wonderful book, Brave Black Regiment by Louis Emilio, on page 31, of Gilmore's band involvement when they left Boston. And again on page 318, that Gilmore's band again played on their return to Boston with the depleted brave men of that regiment. Initially, these bands would be used as non-performing propaganda to participate in ceremonies and parades, which initially is what happened with the band of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment as it paraded through Boston and went to war. But as training and proficiency improved, these bands became more important as a statement of intent by the Union leadership. Later, in the case of the 54th, it is also noted that they continued to get tuition from another teacher from New York after the Battle of Fort Warren. And as amazingly as it may seem, and with life so busy indeed for P S Gilmore in the North, he received another request for his services, this time from the South. Please subscribe to that big red sign to get notifications on the next video. It'll seriously help this channel. General Nathaniel Banks knew Gilmore very, very well. And as a former politician in Massachusetts and indeed former governor of the state of Massachusetts, he knew what Gilmore had just achieved in his short career in America of 15 years. But he would have also known that Gilmore had recently done in Boston, and specifically the confines of Camp Meigs, Reidsville, Boston. He wanted Gilmore now to do, as he said, to again reorganize the bands of Louisiana. Where, I wonder, had Gilmore heard that before? And so next week we visit New Orleans in 1863-1864 and discover what P S Gilmore would achieve there and its effect and its legacy, even to this day.